Hi, everybody. So let's pick up with chapter 8, and we're going to talk about the basics about training in this segment. So, first off, let's start off by talking about why it's so important to invest in training. Actually, probably a mislabeled slide, because really what I wanted to talk about is the evidence that it must be important. Because 90%, more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies have some type of formal training program. So that kind of implies that it must be important, or they wouldn't all basically be doing this kind of behavior. So, okay, must be important because most do it. Okay, number two, they spend a lot of money on it. Um, uh, uh, U.S. organizations spend $126 billion annually on employee learning and development. So, again, it must be important, or companies wouldn't invest so much time and so much money into these programs. And then finally, if you look at just the top 125 companies in the US, the average training budget is $145 million, basically. Um, that's the average. That means that there are some companies that are spending way more than 145 million, and there are some companies that are spending way less than that. But on average, $145 million per year is budgeted towards training and development. That's a lot of money. And so that it kind of implies that companies feel like it's worthwhile and that it must do something for their bottom line to engage in training and development. So, why is training needed if the selection system that we were talking about last time um, does its job and identifies high performers? Why would we still need to train them? They're supposed to be, already high performers. They're ready for the job. Well, I mean, I think we all probably realize that, you may be a really great candidate, but you still need some job specific training or some organization specific training. I mean, you may already have been in the same basic position, but with another organization, and you still are going to have to learn some things about the organization so that you can function efficiently in your new position. Um, Sometimes employees who are currently working for the organization will need some retraining. There may have been changes in the job that they're doing. Maybe new technology came along, or maybe there's been some downsizing, and so we're going to expand the responsibility or something like that. Or maybe the way that the organization is structured has changed, and so we need to bring our employees up to speed on the new um, regulations or the new expectations or whatever. And so even employees who are completely competent at the job that they currently have may need to grow and develop as a function of changes and things that are going on in the field or in the company. And then just in general, it's worthwhile for employees to continue to develop in the job that they're in over the course of their career. Otherwise, you end up with stagnant and unhappy employees. So if employees are given the opportunity to continue to grow and change and develop and be their best selves, they're going to be better employees in the long run and earn more money for the company or function at a higher level for the organization. Increased organizational commitment plus job satisfaction produces greater productivity. It reduces absenteeism and reduces turnover rates. So when you have employees who feel like they're reaching their fullest potential, they're satisfied with their job, they feel like they have the tools that they need, the skills that they need to be successful at their job, they're much more likely to stick with the job and much less likely to do some of the negative behaviors that we sometimes see in employees where they don't come to work, they slack off, stuff like that. Okay, so that's why we need training. So what is training? Now you might think to yourself, are you serious? But we have a definition from 1961. The formal procedures that a company uses to facilitate learning so that the resultant behavior contributes to the attainment of the company's goals and objectives. So I highlighted sort of the key concepts in this definition because, yeah, we all know what training is. Sometimes it's on the job training where your first day at work, they show you, how the register works and basics like that. Or maybe you got sent to a training program and you had to learn a whole bunch of things about how the job is done before you were turned loose on the job. I mean, whatever it is, the company has some kind of formal set of procedures that they use to make sure that employees learn what they need to know so that when they get on the job, they are going to do a better job of fulfilling the company's goals. So something that we're going to do, some kind of formal procedure that we're going to follow to help ensure that our employees know what they're doing on the jobs, that they are doing what we want, basically. So how does a company figure out what training they actually need to implement in their, with their workforce? This, again, sounds like a no-duh statement, but we have to figure out what is lacking, really. We have to figure out what our training needs are before we try and develop a training program. So first thing we might need to do is assess our incumbents to figure out what they don't know. So we might engage in competency-based training, where we figure out what basic competencies we want all of our employees to have so that we can develop a training program that teaches those competencies. So if our need is for our employees to have a certain set of basic skills, then we could follow a competency-based training program. So what we're talking about here with identifying the training needs is we can look at the needs of the organization. We could talk about what tasks need to be done and how to make sure that our employees know how to do those. We could look for person-based factors like, push the wrong button there. Person-based, interpersonal skills, stuff like that. Or we might be interested in demographic training, training surrounding certain groups that need extra background training. Okay, so now I'm meant to push the button and now it won't go. Okay, perfect. So organizational analysis. What that means is we're going to determine the organization's short and long-term goals, and then we're going to compare them to what the organization is actually accomplishing. So if your short-term goal is X, and you are actually currently accomplishing X minus 5, you know that we've got a gap. Those would be what we call unmet goals. Those are going to become our training targets. And so anything that we are able to establish is lacking in the achievement of our short-term or the steps that need to be achieved towards our long-term goals. Anything that's being unmet can serve as a training target. We can focus our energy on trying to train our employees to have those skills. One of the things when you're doing an organizational analysis that you'll take into consideration is the organizational culture that might be actually inhibiting the development of these skills, or that might make it more difficult for us to run the kind of training that we need. So, for example, if we see that we've got unmet goals, and the best way to achieve those unmet goals is to do some background training, but the managers don't really want the employees taking the time away from working to go get better trained, even though they know that when they come back from the training, they're going to be more efficient. That might be one of these organizational culture issues that is going to undermine the training program. So these are the kinds of things that need to be considered, so that maybe the first step is to train the managers so that they have the correct attitude towards the importance of training their underlings, so that then we can do the training and have it be as effective as possible. Task analysis is where we're going to examine the task requirements for successful conduct of each job. So remember way back, I don't even remember what chapter it was, when we were talking about job analysis and figuring out what elements, what tasks and things go into each job. So you figure out what tasks must be mastered so that we'll have success on the job. And then you're going to develop training programs to fix any deficiencies that employees may be having in the ability to complete these kinds of tasks. This is one example where selection and training might fit together, because if you've done a job analysis and you've figured out what tasks need to be met, maybe during the selection process you could carefully select people who either already have the skills to complete these tasks, or maybe show the aptitude towards being able to achieve these tasks. With person analysis, we look at how well all employees are carrying out the job responsibilities and duties. We're going to use something like a performance appraisal to figure out those employees who might be needing some extra training. It could be that employees nominate themselves. Sometimes an employee recognizes that they have a part of their job that they don't feel really comfortable with. And so given the opportunity, they might say, hey, I would really like to take that training because you know what, I don't feel that comfortable with the Office suite, or I'm fine with some parts of it, but I really don't know how to run OneNote, or that's the first one that came to my mind as a researcher. But so they may nominate themselves, or it might be the case that you administer some kind of test to figure out who's lacking specific competencies or whatever, and then that test nominates the employee for additional training. But the idea here is to figure out, you know, how well people are doing, and then figure out those who need the additional training to make them as efficient as they can be. Demographic analysis looks at areas that might be lacking in certain demographic groups. Certain demographic groups might need additional training to bring them up to speed so that they can do as well as other demographic groups. So for example, not to target older employees, but you know, maybe older employees have never had to work with some kind of technology on the job before. And so you realize, okay, so the younger kids might be more familiar with it. Maybe they learned it when they were in school or whatever. The older employees might need additional training, and so we might target our training towards that demographic because we assume they may not have the skills. If we are using special accommodations for anybody with a disability, they might need to be trained in how to use those special technologies and things to facilitate their job. So you might have been clever enough to figure out a way to you know, accommodate their disability, but they may not be familiar with it. You know, for example, a student who is visually impaired and needs to take an exam can go to the Disability Resource Center and have the test read to them by the computer. But they have to become familiar with that technology or they're not going to be able to use it. So that's sort of an example that would be similar to what would happen in the workplace. Sometimes all you need to do is use this special accommodation and you don't know how to use it. So that's another example. I see I have a typo in there. Redesign something's missing. Skip that. I meant to delete it. The key thing with these demographic analyses is that the trainers must be really sensitive to not generalizing to every member of the group. For example, if we assume that because you're over 50, you won't know how to use this piece of technology, that can be construed as discriminatory. You're assuming stuff about me, or you're treating me differently because I'm of a particular age, or because I belong to a particular disability group, or I belong to an immigrant group, or something like that. So you have to be really careful that you are identifying employees who need it, but maybe focus your search more heavily on people who belong to a demographic group who has historically needed the additional training. Again, we talked before about discrimination and stuff like that. If you can show that you're A, trying to help somebody and not trying to use it against them, and then B, you're applying it on a one-by-one basis and not just an entire group. Like back when they first introduced sexual harassment training, only men ever had to go. And men ultimately said, wait a second. And then they started making everybody go. You can't do additional training for a particular group assuming that every member of that group is going to need that training. Instead, you might say, well, because historically this group's needed more training, we will target our training towards members of that group, maybe still sort them based on individual differences. All right, let's go ahead and stop here, and in the next segment we'll talk about issues having to do with how training is implemented.